now I'm pleased to welcome our speakers, Michael Boland, BIA Kelsey Vice President Content and Chief Analyst, and Mitch Ratcliffe, BIA Kelsey's Digital Media Strategic and Senior Analyst at BIA Kelsey. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Georgina. Welcome, everyone. As Georgina mentioned, I'm Mike Boland, analyst with BIA Kelsey, and with me I have my colleague and sidekick for today's discussion, Mitch Ratcliffe. We're talking today about our new favorite topic, which is the local on-demand economy. And that's had lots of different names in the past, such as collaborative consumption and the sharing economy, but we're branding it as the local on-demand economy, or LOAD for short, which is really the proliferation of on-demand services such as Uber into several of the other local service verticals that BIA Kelsey's been covering for decades. And those on-demand service models have unique attributes and economics, which we're going to go over today. And they're all resonating in a very mobile and increasingly on-demand culture. So before we go into all of that, Mitch, for the sake of context, let's talk about you for a minute. You're the newest addition to the BIA Kelsey team and working on several things, including the BIA Kelsey Now conference. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, I joined Kelsey in the January timeframe after my long career in startups and most recently at Microsoft and Haibu in the Yellow Pages business. The reason that this was really attractive to me is that the local on-demand economy, to me, is the biggest thing I've seen come along since the introduction of the commercial internet in the 1990s. It's a transformation that is much more than about any one of the categories people have been talking about: 1099, sharing, collaboration economy, the impact of automation. It's about the aggregate impact of all of these different socioeconomic and technical trends that are converging, and we feel they're converging just starting now and will radically transform the way that marketing is done over the next 10 years.
Yeah, and there is a lot driving this. I like to delineate between what's driving the supply and what's driving the demand, because I think they're two separate discussions, although they come together well in load. But demand in terms of consumers is being driven by lots of interesting macro trends. We have smartphone penetration causing a very transient and immediacy-driven culture, and that's in turn conditioned us to expect things on demand and treat the mobile device as what I like to call a remote control for the physical world. We also have millennials who are increasingly buying empowered and sometimes have a very needy demeanor that aligns with load demand on-demand services. I hope I'm not offending anyone by saying that. We also have urbanization, more of a percentage of population living in cities. That population density creates a network effect for load models to thrive. Those are just a few trends on the demand side. On the supply side, you brought up a lot of good points. We're seeing a lot of macro factors driving this. The flexibility of load gigs, as we're calling them, like an Uber driver, has really resonated with a lot of individuals who value flexibility. I heard this term this week: flexibility is the new stability. And that empowerment really engenders what we're calling the 1099 economy, and then shifting our societal view of what is work, as you pointed out. So the question here, based on all of those factors and the supply and demand dynamics coming together, what do all these factors tell us about the entry points for load business opportunities? I mean, there's consumer-facing apps, there are the operational logistical tools on the supplier-facing side. Where do we see opportunity here in this ecosystem, really?
Yeah, and it is. And I think it's really important to emphasize that it's evolving. This is not necessarily the way it is going to be, or that even we have a completely accurate view of it today. But what I do think is clearly the first advantage position in this market is the organizing of supply. And we're seeing that in two different ways. There's the branded vertical service of HomeJoy, Home Advisor, Uber for driving, Airbnb for getting what is the equivalent of a hotel room in another context. And then there is sort of a full range marketplace service capability developing, and there are a number of vendors who are going to be out there making transactional and marketing services and customer relationship management services available to these individual workers, and simply allowing them to brand themselves within these large generic marketplaces. So I think you're going to see a very heavy investment in both of those categories going forward. And the ultimate answer is going to be that there'll probably be a mix. You'll sometimes want to use a heavily branded service. For instance, I would point to Shuttle with D's instead of T's. That's a driving service for children. And you certainly want to make sure that you've got a branded, vetted, bonded driver who is going to be responsible and has no criminal record of being involved with children in bad ways. That's something that a vertical brand can focus on and really develop as a customer experience. And I believe that there'll be a great deal of value attributed to those kinds of relationships. Now, on the other hand, in these more generic markets, they're depending on a transition from a push to a pull society, and that is, instead of simply receiving ads and then acting in response to the ads when we feel like we can no longer resist the desire to buy that Lexus or whatever it may be, which I think is actually how advertisers sometimes think of it, is we just need to give them enough of the drug that they will just can't resist buying more. On the other hand, these demand-based environments, somebody will literally be able to say, I'm looking for the following thing or service or experience, and with potentially very deep levels of detail about what that product or service or experience entails. And so you'll see a very different world evolving in that freelance marketplace, where one of the functions of the back end may also be to bring together the right set of providers rather than simply the one provider who's going to show up at your house to deliver something.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of supporting functions there. You mentioned the trust that's inherent in something like Shuttle, the security and authentication. Those are going to be supporting functions of this overall ecosystem where there are entry points for business opportunities. But I want to focus in on another kind of advantage that a lot of people are seeing with Load, which is its unit economics. And my favorite example that captures some of that is car washes. I think this is a category where we're going to see it grow. We see a few people there already. There's a company called Wipe. And the idea is that the largest component of a car wash's cost structure is real estate. For marketing reasons, you want to be on that busy intersection, and that's expensive. So that cost is built into what they have to charge for a car wash. Now, to take that real estate out of the equation, an on-demand car wash scenario could be a car wash professional that comes to your house, uses your real estate, your driveway, your hose and water, so thus reducing the cost structure dramatically. And that allows for leaner unit economics, as I said. In other words, there's enough leeway to spread around the savings, so the customer gets a great deal. The car wash professional still makes a decent margin because his or her overhead is lessened. For the developer of the on-demand app, they can still take a cut, and everyone's happy except for maybe the guy that owns the building where the car wash used to be, who's no longer getting a rent check. So what do you think about those kind of structural, I don't know, compressing the supply chain in ways that that allow for more margin?
Well, so I think that is one of the things that is going to be critical to success as an on-demand provider is identifying a process and really working to optimize that process as much as possible. Yeah. And there are constant money-saving opportunities with the rise of automation and other capabilities.
Exactly.
That you put to work. Once you know that your job is to deliver this experience with these people, for instance, buying the right biodegradable soap and getting a good price for that washer, and then making that price break available to the washer too, is another potential line of revenue for the service provider. Now we're in the middle of scoping this market right now, and just based on where we are today, and we project that only 18% of the people in the United States can even access an on-demand market in a meaningful and convenient way at this point. Just within household work that is currently unpaid, that's cooking meals, washing clothes, doing the yard work, and things like that. This is based on the U.S. Census data. That 18% of people with access could generate up to $46 billion in service revenue just this year. Now, and within that breaks out to up to $296 billion in food preparation, $84 billion in house cleaning services, $34 billion for just general household management, which is interesting to one of our speakers, for instance, at the show, called Hello Alfred, whose service is to coordinate other load services. So basically you get an Alfred, a person who coordinates all these other on-demand people who you have working with you. So there's a massive market opportunity out there, and as we see this scaling over the course of the next 15 years, and we're working to try to build a projection that gives a sense of the size of this market that far out, we're talking about potentially trillions of dollars in revenue being recognized, and sometimes for the first time within the economy. Most home-based work, unless it generates a tax return, doesn't get counted. And one of the things we know from the developmental economics world that has been focused on building up third world emerging economies is that when you start to count things that weren't counted before, they become part of the economy. And so to some extent, we're about to bring a whole, maybe up to half of the work that we do into a tradable environment where you think, you know, for 20 bucks, I could have somebody drive over there and get that instead of me doing it, because I can make 36 bucks working with the kids in the neighborhood on a project while their parents are out. And thinking about that community role as the individual provider is going to be really important to that. Now, the other thing you mentioned is the real estate impact, and I think that's a potentially powerful one. It's going to mean that there is not a need for a storefront, that I got to be on Main Street to be accidentally found element. The way that we've marketed in the past. And so I think you'll see a real transformation in the use of space, and commercial space particularly, over the course of the next 10 years as well.
Well, I love how it replaces real estate with technology to reach the goal of customer acquisition. And that technology, if it can reach a network effect, can really bring that transparency to a marketplace and directly link buyer and seller in these more efficient ways that cut out all this other stuff in the value chain that's traditionally created margin compression, in this case, a building. So that's interesting. So I also want to come back to some of your market valuation, market sizing questions, because I think that opens up an interesting area. First, what I want to do is take an audience question. We told the audience we'd be taking questions. I'll also now remind the audience, tweet us at hashtag BIA Kelsey Live, or add it to the window you'll see there on the GoToMeeting dashboard. So I have a question here. What are the verticals that load hasn't penetrated where it could go next? And, you know, I'll take a first stab at that and then let you jump in, Mitch. I think this is an interesting question because it's mostly been about services, drivers, laundry, food delivery. I think that's really going to move up market to higher end professional services, and I think that's where a large opportunity is going to reside. One example is Avo Advisor, is a service that I actually test drove and blogged about. You can read that on the BIA Kelsey blog. And what it does is create liquidity in the remnant downtime throughout a lawyer's day, and allows them to monetize their time in 15-minute increments, which increases their billable hours. And since Avo is handling the customer acquisition and billing, lawyers are okay with charging less than the normal billable rate. So essentially it's 39 bucks for 15 minutes with a lawyer over the phone. And 15 minutes might not seem like a lot, and it's really not for everyone, but it's great for certain situations where you're level setting, finding out what you need to know at the front end of a legal process without having to waste a bunch of money meeting with several lawyers and paying their full hourly rate at, you know, 400 bucks an hour or so. And the rigmarole of scheduling those appointments and that whole traditional process is bloated. So when I tried Avo Advisor, I requested a lawyer in a certain legal specific category, discipline, and 30 seconds later my phone was ringing. It really was an Uber-like experience of pressing a button, being matched with a service provider instantly, and that call ended up being very valuable. So that's just one example. Mitch, do you want to talk about Heal, who we're having at the conference?
Well, so the house call is being made into an on-demand service, and we'll make a return basically. Get Heal is the URL for the service, but it's based in LA, and Heal provides both a doctor and a physician's assistant who will drive to your home and do a house call, essentially for $99, plus whatever materials they may need to use. So if you've got a flu or a cold, the doctor will come by for 99 bucks, prescribe you the medicine you need or tell you that you have pneumonia and better get to the hospital. And that's a profound change from what we think of as going to the doctor, waiting for about 15 or 20 minutes because his schedule's always overbooked, and then you finally get in and you get about 2 minutes with him. These are younger doctors generally, but doctors who are more committed to having a personal relationship with their patients in their own home, so that they can also take, from a diagnostic perspective, a view of what the home is like. When you're sitting in the office, you have no idea what the person's lifestyle is. So it actually helps them, they believe, get a better view into the whole patient process rather than simply lower the cost of that one service, the house call. I think there's a lot of areas where this has not penetrated. I believe that in the long term, our more permeable enterprise organizations are going to be bringing people in and out of their organizations based on the skills that they have when they're needed for the organization given its stage in life. So for instance, they may be at some point in the future outsourcing Scrum masters or meeting management people or project management people who are simply brought in to manage the internal resources of the company when they're needed. So I believe PMs on demand are going to be a big part of the software business going forward. I also think an area that has not been addressed at all, as far as I can tell, is the delivery of services for these 1099 workers to help them deal with the fact that they'll be able to pay taxes, will have to pay taxes ahead because they're earning this money separately if they breach a certain income level. They need help with organizing themselves as a business that can take write-offs on the business costs that they are going to be using in delivering their business, which means that in an Uber driver situation, they could even write their car off as a capital investment. So we're going to need to see a whole level of service, rethinking of services for small business people that focus around providing all the back office capabilities, all the things that you would put in the back of that storefront downtown to start to support your business, the accountant, the marketers, and otherwise. All of this stuff is going to be partly accessed on an on-demand basis, may sometimes be completely on-demand, and the organization's real business will be managing the resources they have access to.
I think the other higher-end kind of professional fields where this makes sense are those either billed hourly or project-based that can really use load services, to create that same liquidity in their remnant downtime, as I mentioned, for lawyers. And one area where I believe that's really going to blow up based on the volume of supply of solo proprietors is design. So two examples that have attributes I think conducive to load where we're going to see it grow is graphic design and interior design, and the ability to do kind of smaller, lower barrier projects on demand. So I want to go back to the market sizing. I think you brought up a great point there. We've talked about the what and the why, and I think an important question is the how much. How big could load be? I think you threw out some interesting numbers, vertically specific. To take a first kind of swing at that, I devised a model in our white paper, which was essentially to look at load as a percentage of the 137 billion local ad market that BIA Kelsey projects. So for example, if it displaces 20% of that, it could be about 32 billion. And that's only a basic construct to really begin to put it into perspective, but I think any real market sizing would have to consider, as you've done, that it's not just a simple substitution effect of existing ad dollars in local. I think it goes beyond that, and I think that's a key point for anyone that's currently in the local media space. And what I mean by that is because load has these lower barriers to entry for service providers, its addressable market could exceed that current SMB advertising pie. You mentioned some numbers on total SMBs. There are about 27, 28 million in the U.S. BIA Kelsey projects that about 19% of them spend money on any form of advertising. So that other 81%, which is about 22 million SMBs, could really represent load's addressable market and therefore an incremental growth opportunity for local media companies. And it probably, as just a final note here, goes even beyond that because the universe of individuals and 1099 workers is even bigger than that SMB universe. Go ahead, Mitch.
Yeah, well, no, you're absolutely right. It puts that entire marketing spend at risk because of the way that marketing is sold today as advertising, and that's impression based. You really don't know, as the old saying goes, which half of your advertising works. In an on-demand environment, you may get a request from a customer and just simply bid for the business, but you'll always know how much business is out there because people will be asking for those bids.
Yep.
One of the other things that, so let me just share a couple more numbers here. One of the other things we did was look at what the share for the
We've got about 4 minutes for a lot of audience questions, so do it quickly, please.
Okay, so we
go ahead, but yeah, just quick.
Let's take the grocery space, for instance. We know that the shopping portion of that business is worth, excuse me, now I've lost the place. Somewhere in the order of $58 billion. Now, if you take and assume that you're going to have the kind of percentage that Uber takes today, 20%, that means that there's $3.3 billion in addressable grocery delivery money out there today. We don't think that anybody has gotten close to taking much of that market, but we do know that there are at least $150 to $200 million worth of revenue being generated by various grocery delivery companies, from Amazon Fresh through Instacart and so forth now. That's only going to rise, but you're also, I think, going to see pressure on those that share of revenue that those companies take. At some point, I would expect to see that drop to 10% of the average transaction or lower. And you see a lot of price pressure in the competition between Lyft and Uber right now. It ends up lowering the driver's pay in many cases, but I think what you're going to see is that they're going to need to keep the drivers, and by retaining them with higher wages, they're going to have to cut their own margins. So it's going to be a margin stressed business for virtually forever. However, we know, as Walmart has proven, you can make a remarkable amount of money on a 3.5% margin if you've got your supply chain under control. So
yep.
This is a very, very different environment we're moving into.
Yeah, and I think the important part there is that by looking at some of these quantification metrics, it really starts to reveal who this applies to. I think a very important question is who should be paying attention to this. And of course, it's app developers, it's venture capitalists, it's all of the different parts of the value chain you mentioned. I mentioned that the local media ecosystem is affected by this. I think that's another constituency here where Load can grow the overall addressable market for reaching the new business that they or the entire local media industry hasn't reached with an advertising and marketing product. Someone there is not on mute. So the question is, can they utilize existing audiences and sales channels to bolt on Load-type offerings to their current bundles of advertising and marketing product? I think if they can, they're in really the pole position to be one of the biggest beneficiaries of this whole Load opportunity. So I'm going to go to an audience question. We have two of them here. We'll answer them both pretty quickly because we're running out of time. One is, you know, we talked about a lot of the positives. What are some of the products and industries that the on-demand economy will threaten? I'll take a first swing at that. One of the areas I've been writing about that could be impacted by Load is search. So if you look at the traditional local search process, it's an arguably convoluted process of searching, then sifting through results, and then reading reviews and qualifying decisions in certain ways, then calling a business and setting up an appointment and blah, blah, blah. The Load comparison is simply pressing a button, and the matching algorithm does the rest. You have a service in minutes. I think Google, as the leader in the search kind of world, is aware of this trend and is working to transition itself to live in this more on-demand oriented world. Just today, it integrated an on-demand food ordering feature as a one-click option within search results, keep people in search and not going to standalone apps. And there are rumors about how it's moving into on-demand home services. That's just one example of something that I think is going to be at least threatened a bit or motivated to innovate the search world. One more audience question here for you, Mitch. The on-demand economy has gotten lots of flack for abusing workers. Will that slow the growth that we're talking about here? You sent a great article yesterday from the Philadelphia Inquirer, good investigative piece about some of the downsides or the dark sides of this.
Yeah, that was a great piece of work. The reporter basically found that Uber takes far more than 20%, and that the amount of money that a driver makes is high at the beginning and tends to shrink as they move into competition with another provider in the market. And it worked out to roughly $13.60 an hour that the actual Uber driver, and this was in Philadelphia, was taking home. I think this is one of the conversations that we need to have as business people. How are we going to create an environment in which there are going to be robustly consuming consumers? And that means you have to pay people. Most of these companies, Uber in particular, has had a number of conflicts with local government and even gone to court a couple of times.
Yep.
Are working in a legal gray area. In some cases, they're actually against the law, and they're already out there trying to change the laws, lobbying to make this possible.
Let's conclude that by saying that some of these legal and roadblock issues are certainly going to temper some of the market sizing we did and need to be acknowledged when anyone going at this space is going to
and we'll be talking about that at the show, too.
Yep, exactly. So that's a good segue. Mitch, I want to get a final question for you to answer. What's the session you are most looking forward to at BIA Kelsey now, and if you can, the Twitter version of the answer?
The Twitter version of the answer is the owning, loaning, and sharing session, which is about the various models of possession that we're going to be using in the future. I think you're going to find some surprising ideas about facilitating not just exchanges of money, but exchanges of services. And that, when that starts to take place, as these companies start to coordinate their shared services offerings, it's going to be a profoundly interesting business story.
Yep, and we're going to be able to talk about all the verticals it's growing into, because I think that's a key point that everyone always talks about, the Uberification of local, and I use that term too because it just makes people understand what you're talking about off the bat. But in some ways I don't like that term because it implies that everything's already been Uberified, but we have so much growth there to come. So let's close out here. I want to give everyone here a bit more information on BIA Kelsey now. Again, it's the conference we're running June 12th in San Francisco. On this topic we discussed today, but we really only scratched the surface. There's so much there. So we're gearing up for the show. We're putting on the final touches of the program. We're excited to have top name speakers who are impacting this load evolving ecosystem. We have HomeJoy and Hotel Tonight and Square, MasterCard, lots of VCs, including Comcast Ventures and Obvious Ventures and others that are really making investments in the space. So we'd love to see you there, and hopefully the last 30 minutes characterize those themes for you. Again, we really only scratched the surface because there's so much to talk about here. But if you're interested in joining us, you can actually save $100 by using the discount code that's shown here. There you go. You can also email me personally if you have any questions. I'm at mboland@biakelsey.com. So we hope this was valuable for you. Thanks for listening. And at this point, I will kick it back to Georgina for a few quick closing notes. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Again, thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we'll be sending a link to everybody that joined the webinar today. We thank you for viewing and thank you for taking your time. Please contact us at info@biakelsey.com if you have any questions. And we hope to see you at the June conference for BIA Kelsey now.